Bring in show music, please.
This is Squawk Pod, and I'm CNBC producer Cameron Costa. On today's episode, the Supreme Court is set to decide on President Trump's authority to enact tariffs. The U.S. is poised for a potential attack on Iran. Private credit stocks are sliding, and Hollywood giant James Cameron is weighing in on the Warner Brothers Discovery deal that we cannot stop talking about.
What do you call that when it's both options are really bad for Hollywood? It's a
double-edged sword?
No, it's worse.
It's a conundrum.
Conundrum. It's a lose-lose for they don't like Netflix or the Ellisons.
Plus, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is now a strategic advisor to the American Gaming Association, and he's taking aim at Kalshi and Polymarket, both of which are firm on the distinction between sports betting and prediction markets.
Please, spare me. What they're trying to do is avoid regulation and avoid being taxed at the state level. Guess what? DraftKings would like to do that. FanDuel would like to do that. BetMGM would like to do that. But they're following the law. These guys are breaking the law.
And Palantir is joining the wave of companies and wealthy people who are moving to Florida. The software giant is once again moving its HQ. It swapped Palo Alto for Denver back in 2020, and now it's headed to Miami. Sitting Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, on the tax-driven influx of new residents.
I saw you in California, and I will tell you, this wealth tax is having a huge impact on people fleeing to Florida. 6 months ago, everyone was talking about Mindami causing New York to flee. I don't know that we've really seen that, but on this California thing, these are really, really big folks.
It's Friday, February 20th, and Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Andrew by in 3, 2, 1. Cue Andrew.
Good morning. Welcome to Squawk Box on this Friday morning right here on CNBC. We are live at the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Andrew Sorkin, along with Joe Kernen. Becky's still off today, but we're not. We're here and we're still going.
We're watching shares of private capital manager Blue Owl. They fell close to 8% yesterday. The company said it had sold $1.4 billion in assets from several funds and would return some cash to investors. Blue Owl also saying it's going to prevent investors in the fund from withdrawing money every quarter. Shares of private equity firms losing ground yesterday, as you can see, pretty significantly. In a statement, Blue Owl said, contrary, though, to what has been reported by some, we're not halting investor liquidity in OBDC2. In fact, we're accelerating the return of capital. This asset sale will return 30% of OBDC2 investors' capital at book value to shareholders equally on a pro rata basis. Instead of resuming a 5% a quarter tender, we're only tendering investors that get a small portion of the capital back. We're returning 6 times as much capital and returning it to all shareholders over the next 45 days. So that's their statement. In the coming quarters, we will continue to pursue this plan to return capital to the OBDC2 investors.
We just had the president, and the CEO, rather, of Blue Owl on 2 weeks ago, and he said everything is hunky-dory in the universe. And, of course, everything is not hunky-dory.
It can happen quickly, or,
in the universe.
Or it can be whistling past the graveyard. Yeah.
I have a solution, by the way, I want to propose to you. Not about watches.
Oh,
about
I thought
this.
you were going to.
Well, we can talk about the watches in a moment.
No, it's
on this Blue Owl business.
It's out of my price range.
The semi-liquid, what they call semi-liquid instruments, where basically you can buy it on any day, but you basically can't necessarily sell it on any given day.
Right.
And they can put these gates up if they want, which, by the way, is supposed to be a feature and not a bug of the program.
Right.
I think that they should only be offered in almost like a target-dated approach to investors. So if you are 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, it may very well be that you can live without the money on the other end.
Right.
And this is actually, on a long-term basis, a great way to do it.
Right.
It seems to me that if you're 50 years old or 60 years old or 70 years old.
I don't like where you're going now with this.
80 years old.
Let's start with 80.
Start with 80.
Okay.
But let's say
you might only live to 95.
Let's say you're 60 years old. Maybe you should not be allowed to be in these funds.
Right. But that's, well, I mean, 60, we at least go 70. You could get it out within 5 years, probably, right?
Well, that's the question. Can you and whether and this is the whole issue about these semi-liquid instruments.
And a lot of different instruments like that. There are many. Even life insurance. Some universal life doesn't really help that much until.
But most people aren't buying. I mean, look, Blue Owl Capital, which we're showing on the screen right now, this is not a semi-liquid instrument. Let me just be clear. But
Yeah.
some of these funds that are underneath
Right, like
Blue
the
Owl
OBC, yeah.
are.
Right.
And so the question is, if this is the future, by the way, of where we're going to allow these private either credit instruments or private equity instruments or real estate instruments or other kinds of instruments that look like this.
You got to get used to the illiquidity.
We got to get used to the illiquidity, and the question is, how should you live with that? And I think it's about a target-dated approach. Anyway, that's my thought of the morning.
Well, you could, you've got a future in finance.
Thank you. Sticking with private credit this morning, some new reports, this one coming from Bloomberg, saying that Bank of America is going to use $25 billion of its own money on deals with agreements originating in BofA's capital markets division. The report says the Bank of America tapped new leaders for the private credit drive. So the space is still heating up. Meantime, oil prices in focus. We got to tell you about where things are happening, or what's happening now with some of the increased tension in the Middle East. President Trump saying he's going to decide in the next 10 days whether to launch military strikes against Iran.
We're either going to get a deal or it's going to be unfortunate for them. I would think that would be enough time, 10, 15 days, pretty much maximum.
That was President Trump on Air Force One yesterday. The U.S. has been building a major military presence in the Middle East, an aircraft carrier already in the region with a second one on the way. The Wall Street Journal reporting the president is considering a limited strike on Iran to pressure the country to make a deal on ending nuclear enrichment. If Iran doesn't respond, the Journal says the U.S. could launch a broader campaign.
Seems like Iran is taking it seriously. They're doing, the leadership. They're making sure that it's dispersed in case. They're doing a lot of things in preparation for what they think is coming. On our side, it seems like it's a very limited option that's being considered.
Legendary Hollywood director James Cameron now weighing in against Netflix's proposed acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery. In a letter obtained by CNBC that Cameron sent to Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee, the Titanic director said the potential deal could lead to massive job losses in Hollywood, decimate the movie theater business, and affect one of America's biggest export sectors. Senator Lee chairs the chamber's subcommittee on antitrust. In response to a request for comment, Netflix pointed to its written testimony at a congressional hearing earlier this month, which said under that deal, Netflix would increase production investments. Separately, Reuters reporting that Netflix has what sources called ample cash and could increase its offer for Warner Brothers if Paramount Skydance ends up deciding to bid. And we're going to find out in literally just days how this is all going to shake out. I think this is the weekend.
It was,
Deal weekend. It's here.
But it was weird when it was announced. Some of the people that said they weren't as concerned about Netflix. I can't remember. I think even Adam Aron may have said that remember, I don't think he said that it would be the end of AMC. So some people, it seems like the knee-jerk take would be the James Cameron take, that it'd be bad for the movie business. Unfortunately, Hollywood was faced with, Netflix or, the Ellisons, which is for people in Hollywood, anyone that doesn't think Trump is Satan is they don't want him running a company. So what do you call that when it's both options are really bad for Hollywood? It's a
double-edged sword.
No, it's worse.
It's a conundrum.
Conundrum. It's a lose-lose for they don't like Netflix or the Ellisons.
Oh yeah, no, they would much
artists.
prefer just to keep all these things separate. That would be the better path.
Yeah.
From a creative perspective, probably.
And the Supreme Court could rule as soon as today on President Trump's authority to impose tariffs. And Eamon Javers joins us now with more. There's been so many tea leaves to read as the Supreme Court had a chance. How many times previous to this, Eamon, we were waiting and they didn't? And a lot of people thought, because of the urgency that everyone said around the decision, everyone thought that they would do it much sooner. But it's a mystery. It's a mystery. The Supreme Court.
Everyone
they
did
like
think that, Joe.
They like that, though, don't they? It's a mystery. It's impossible to figure out.
It's kind of a judicial flex.
Isn't
right?
it?
Yeah.
So what do you think? Today's the day?
That's their power.
Yeah.
I don't know. We've been through this drill a few times now already in 2026, as you say, Joe. The Supreme Court announces a decision day, but we just don't know what cases are going to be decided until the notices start coming out at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So it's possible that we'll get a ruling on the legality of President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs this morning, or a ruling on whether the president can fire Lisa Cook from the board of the Federal Reserve. But there's just no guarantee. So let's start with tariffs. There are literal billions of dollars at stake in the decision on whether the president's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which people in Washington call IEPA for short, was appropriate, because that statute authorizes a president to regulate international commerce in an emergency, but does not mention tax or tariff power. Now, the decision won't affect all the tariffs that President Trump put in place last year, because he used other authorities to impose some of those tariffs. But of the $293 billion in total tariff revenue collected in 2025 and 2026, so far, $133 billion of that was collected under IEPA, and that money would presumably have to be paid back to the American companies that it was collected from if President Trump loses this case. And then there's also the question of the president's attempt to fire Lisa Cook as a member of the board of the Fed. At some point, the Supreme Court is expected to weigh in on whether the president has the authority to fire her based on unproven allegations of mortgage fraud in her personal residence. The question will come down to what the definition should be of a for-cause firing. Does that have to be adjudicated wrongdoing, or can mere allegations, even a president's whim, be enough to have the president have the authority to fire her? The way the Supreme Court decides on that could alter the future of Federal Reserve independence from the political system. So we're going to have to watch all of this, and maybe we'll be all dressed up with no place to go again, or maybe not. Could be a big news day, guys.
We should always be prepared. But so as I said,
That's right.
There's so many different ways to read the tea leaves. Some people said, well, you know, Chief Justice Roberts realizes all the ramifications, and they're trying to thread some type of needle, and it's taking a longer time to figure out how to have some type of narrow or more narrow ruling than just a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the tariffs. And then the prediction markets move around based on how long it's taking, and the odds of, I think at one point it was 90% from the questions that the justices had asked. I think it was 90% that it was going to be against, and then it takes a while and it goes to, that drops to 75%, but nobody knows. I just think it's kind of cool that the Supreme Court of all the institutions is still, I know it's maybe not as revered, people say, as before in public opinion, but there's still something about it. And those robes and the mystery, and we just can't. Eamon, there's
no cameras in there.
Yeah, and we can't explain why it's taking a long time. It just is. It's a mystery.
Can't.
It's a mystery.
I want to know how many Supreme Court clerks are placing prediction market bets on this, right? I mean, how many insiders know the answer to this and are already betting? Look, I mean, I'm not a Supreme Court clerk. I couldn't even begin to tell you the inner workings of the Supreme Court. My guess, and just a guess, is that the fact that the tariff ruling is taking so long, despite the urgency, despite the fact that companies are still paying billions, every month on this, is that they're trying to build some sort of coalition behind the scenes. I don't think
try to get 9-0
the legal
maybe.
research and reasoning. Yeah, I don't think the legal research and reasoning takes that long. I think coalition building and getting everybody on board probably does.
Eamon, so people talk about trying to get to 9-0. Maybe Justice Roberts is trying to, bring everybody together on this. The other view, though, is that there's a dissenter, or maybe more than one dissenter, and that they're just taking their sweet time trying to write that dissent, and for whatever reason want to keep it going. What do you think of that perspective?
I mean, it could be 12 angry men behind the scenes in the Supreme Court, and we would have no idea.
Right. Or, I mean, it makes sense to me. If you can decide on a complete embargo, why can't you decide on a 10% tariff? I mean, there are times you need to have that authority as the chief executive. Maybe they maybe they are sympathetic to that argument. Eamon, thanks.
Cheese will be next.
Next up on Squawk Pod, we're digging into prediction markets, gambling markets, and the regulation for both with former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
They would say that they are not the house. There is no house.
Yes, there is. They're taking a cut. It's the same thing. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. You're telling me that
I'm
betting
not.
on how
I'm
many
saying
people...
that's the position that they are taking.
Which is a ridiculous position.
These days, Christie is a strategic advisor to the American Gaming Association, and he's coming up right after this break. Welcome back to Squawk Pod with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
The CFTC filing an amicus brief earlier this week defending its right to regulate prediction markets in a Wall Street Journal op-ed. Chair Michael Sella criticizing state legal attacks on the agency's authority. Joining us right now is former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. He's been outspoken on the rights of states to regulate sports gambling and currently is advising the American Gaming Association. In a quick disclosure, we should tell you that CNBC and Kalshi have a commercial relationship that includes CNBC having a minority investment in that company. And of course, we run lots of different Kalshi
we do.
Data on our screen and discuss it as we do others. But good morning.
Good morning.
I've seen you in quite some time.
Good to see you, Andrew.
So help us understand sort of where you land on this debate, this idea between the federal sort of umbrella over the country versus what states should be allowed to do in this context.
You know, I'm confused that a Republican administration believes in greater federal regulation, greater federal oversight and overreach when the states are already doing a great job at what's happening. You have 40 states that have legalized gaming across the country. They set up their own regulatory schemes, their own taxing schemes, their own schemes to protect consumers and the integrity of the game, and it's working across the entire country. Now, all of a sudden, the CFTC wants to come in and become the National Gaming Board.
Right.
How about if they focus on what they're supposed to be focusing on, which is things like derivatives in the agriculture sector and the things that they've been doing all along. Instead, now they want to become why? Because there's any problem? You don't hear any problem across the country from anybody.
So what do you think is driving this?
Look,
is this lobbying money?
Well,
I
think there's lobbying money involved. I think what Kalshi, Polymarket, and some of the other companies have is a huge amount of cash, and they're spending that cash, as you can tell, on advertising, but also they're spending that money in Washington, D.C. Look, we fought for this. You know, this is a fight that I started in 2012 to allow states to make the decision of whether to have sports gambling or not. It was a 6-year fight to finally get the Supreme Court to do it. And when they said we could do it, they said this was a states' rights issue. Mm-hmm. States went out and made the decision. What's going on with Kalshi and Polymarket now is they're violating laws in all 50 states. In the 40 states that have gambling, they say if you want to offer gambling to folks, come and get regulated and licensed and do what you need to do inside the state. For the 10 who don't want it, they're going over the top and saying we're going to give it to you anyway. So in a state, for instance, like Alabama,
right,
a state like Georgia, who said we don't want it, Utah, we don't want it, they're saying too bad, you're going to get it anyway.
Have you seen, all of those states have not filed suits though yet?
Not all, but it's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming because, and look, it's stupid when, you know, the head of the CFTC gets on and like challenges the nation's governors and says, bring it on, we'll see you in court. I mean, does he really want 50 states to be filing lawsuits?
And do you think about this in the context just of sports gambling, or do you think of this in the context of, basically being able to, quote unquote, bet on who's going to be elected? Or do you put them in the same category?
No, not my issue.
Why is that not your issue? Because part of what's happening here is...
Because the states are not doing that. Look, Andrew, when we're really clear about this, I have nothing against Kalshi or Polymarket. If they want to offer sports gambling, fine. Then come into New Jersey, come into Iowa, come into any of the states that have it, register, get licensed, and pay your taxes.
They would say they're not in the gambling business.
Well, come on. So now, I heard this the other day. So
just from a technical perspective, I'm projecting. They would say that they are not the house. There is no house.
Yes, there is. They're taking a cut. It's the same thing. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. You're telling me that betting on how many people...
That's the position that they are taking.
Which is a ridiculous position.
Okay.
If on opening day in baseball season this year, Yankee fans are going to be able to go on Kalshi and Polymarket and bet the over-under on how many strikeouts the opening day pitcher off. That's a derivative? You're a business network. That's a derivative? It's not. It's a sports bet. And that's fine if they want to be in that business. And by the way, it's 90% of their revenue is sports betting, 90%. So please, spare me. What they're trying to do is avoid regulation and avoid being taxed at the state level. Guess what? DraftKings would like to do that. FanDuel would like to do that. BetMGM would like to do that. But they're following the law. These guys are breaking the law.
And just to put it out there again, you are, though, being paid by the Gaming Association, which represents the interests of those who have already followed the state path.
Yeah, absolutely. But let me say this. I'm also the one who fought to create this entire industry.
No, so I'm not saying you don't. You have an authentic claim on it.
Yeah, I just wanted my goal in this is to allow the states to have the rights I fought for them to have.
Right.
And they have those rights. And by the way, if there was a horrible bunch of stuff going on where the states were proving they could not regulate this appropriately, then I can understand why the feds would want to come in. There is no excuse for the federal government to come in. And how are we having a Republican administration who says they're for deregulation now decide they want to become the National Gaming Board?
Let me ask you a related question to that, which is that Eric Trump happens to be, the son of the president, happens to be an advisor to both Polymarket.
Is it Eric? I thought it was Donald Jr.
I'm sorry, Don Jr. I apologize. Don Jr. Happens to be an advisor to both Polymarket and to Kalshi. Does that present a problem to you?
Look, I'm not going to be here this morning to discuss the various personal conflicts that the president's family has with federal regulation. It is what it is. They're doing it. And whether I would hope that does not have an influence on the chairman of the CFTC. But everyone can take a look at it and make their own judgment. I think this is
what is your position? Here you are saying the administration is doing the wrong thing, and that's why I'm asking you.
But Andrew, I can't read their mind.
Right.
Because all I know is it's inconsistent with what the president has said he wants to do, which is to deregulate, get the government out. He just did some big things at the EPA, which I agree with in terms of deregulation. So why are we being inconsistent on this point?
Well, by the way,
everyone else can read
there's
into
an effort
why,
right now to, I mean, we can go to a different topic, but to AI, which is there's a view that the government, this administration believes there should be federal regulations over AI while the states want to regulate it themselves.
But here's the difference I would argue on that, is that there is not right now an existing regime of AI regulation in the states. You have 8 years of experience of the states regulating sports gambling and doing it in a way that makes it completely effective, protects the consumer. Let me tell you something else that Kalshi and Polymarket are doing in the sports area. They're marketing to teenagers. In every one of the states where there's sports gambling, you cannot market to or take bets from anyone under the age of 21. You want to go on Kalshi and Polymarket at 18, 19 years old and do this? You can. That's not protection of the consumer. The states are protecting the consumer.
Let me ask you a separate question. I want to show you a video. We did an interview with the CEO of Kalshi.
Oh, I saw it.
Okay, and this is a different topic.
You watch every day.
I do.
This is a question about how we should think about the concept of insider trading. You were a prosecutor in your life.
Yes, I was.
I want you to listen to this. This is the CEO of Kalshi.
Do you think I'll understand it any better than when I watched it the first time?
Well,
because it was absolutely impossible to understand what the hell he was talking about.
Hang on, let me show you the tape. We asked him about how we think about
this
insider trading
in
the context of being able to bet on anything. Take a look.
As a regulated financial market by the CFTC, we have the same rules as the NASDAQ and the NYSE, and we have the same mechanism of enforcement. We know who the customers are when they onboard to Kalshi, like when you onboard to a brokerage. We know their name, their address, their social security, oftentimes their ID. We know exactly who they are. And then, we have systems that detect any weird patterns of suspicious trades, just like the NASDAQ does. Then it goes to surveillance. We have an investigation staff that runs an investigation and checks who was behind the trade and what they were doing. And if they were doing something wrong and there was insider trading, the punishment goes from fines to referral to the CFTC for criminal prosecution. So the same exact rules, same exact mechanism. And actually, just last week, we beefed up our mechanism of surveillance.
Okay, so you were laughing while this was on.
Well, the SEC has very clear rules on this, and material non-public information. What's the material non-public information in this? How do they don't define it? The CFTC doesn't define it. The CFTC has no enforcement function. They have no employees right now in the enforcement area. None. Zero. So who's doing this exactly? We're counting on that guy that you just saw on the screen to be the arbiter? I mean, this is the same place where there were bets being made on when Maduro would be captured. And someone won 400 grand on that. How did they know that?
Well, and that's my question to you, which is, do you believe that there should be a completely different legal scheme to deal with this, which is to say, the example we were using, because it was just, we had done that interview, I think, right after the Super Bowl, was, what was going to be the opening song that Bad Bunny was going to perform. And the question was, if you happen to be a dancer or maybe a camera person who had seen the rehearsal of it 2 hours earlier, you knew exactly what was going to happen. And if you had bet on it, did you have any kind of fiduciary duty to anybody, and how should this work?
And by the way, the answer to your macro question is he couldn't answer that. But you asked him and he couldn't answer it.
What do you think the answer should be?
Well, look, I think if the federal government wants to get into regulating those kind of wagers, or as they call them, investments, seriously, a bet is now an investment, but let's put that aside. They want to get into that. The states are not involved in that. My problem with this is you have 40 states now regulating this effectively to protect the integrity of the game, to protect the consumer, and let's take a state like Tennessee, Andrew. Sports gambling revenue funds their entire school choice program. And that revenue is now going down because Kalshi, Polymarket, and the predictive markets folks are taking revenue away and refusing to pay taxes in the state of Tennessee. This is a huge accomplishment by Governor Lee to get a full public school choice program out there. And now it's being diminished because these guys don't want to play by the same rules. The head of the CFTC was put a video out that was played on your network that said, I want to eliminate the predictive markets. It's absolutely wrong. If the predictive markets, Kalshi, Polymarket, want to come into New Jersey, register, get licensed, and compete in sports gaming, bring it on. And if their product is better than the other folks that are already in there, then they'll win. And I'm fine with that. That's competition.
But how do you feel more broadly about this idea that we could effectively bet, invest, whatever word you want to use?
Well, they want to use invest. It's
on anything. On anything. And whether there should be fiduciary duties that are different, whether insider trading is real.
Of course it is.
No, I know, but the issue is, if you were to bet on what color ties Joe and I are going to wear every morning, it is possible that the security folks here see what tie we're wearing before the show begins.
Could lay the bet down.
And they could lay the bet down. Would that be illegal for them to lay the bet down?
Under the current laws, as I understand them, the answer is no, because there's nothing that covers this.
Right.
All right? And I think the states are saying, we have no interest in that. We're dealing with sports gambling. So if the feds want to come in and take care of that piece, what would I do if it were? Look, if it were me,
You're king for the day. What do you think should happen to this whole marketplace?
You should be very nervous if I were king for the day. You should be very nervous.
But you ran for president.
But if I were, look, then I think the federal government should come and fill that space. And set up rules and give the CFTC the enforcement authority to be able to do that. They don't need to do it on sports gambling. It's already being done by the states and done effectively. Now, they want to fill that other space. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. I do think that people are going to become victimized in this marketplace if there are no rules and no enforcement mechanism. And by the way, if you talk to people who are betting in the 40 states, and I know I place wagers, I know Joe places wagers, if you ask them if you bet on Polymarket or Kalshi and you get screwed by them, can you go to your state regulator? 78% of the people who answered said yes. And the answer is they can't, because the folks have no enforcement against them. This is an unnecessary overreach by the federal government, and every state should be out there suing in state court to stop it.
Chris Christie, thank you very, very much for this conversation, and we look forward to having the CEO of Kalshi and Polymarket on the show to respond and talk about this.
Will Jersey ever have another Republican governor? I'd like to bet on that. I think that's zero.
Let me tell you, you know what? We can have another one, but we have to run races in a way where we can win. And what I was just in Morris County, New Jersey last night, talking to them about winning again. Yeah. And you don't win in New Jersey by playing national politics.
Okay. Governor, they're playing us out. It's nice to see you.
Well, nice to see you, Andrew.
You can actually listen to the rest of our interview with Kalshi CEO Tarek Mansour on your Squawk Pod feed. If you just scroll down to February 10th, you'll see it. We even have helpful notes in the description that give you time codes for when each interview starts. Still to come on this Squawk Pod, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on his state's appeal to the wealthy and to business owners, what an influx of new residents might mean for everyday affordability.
I think most people look at the housing market now and there's just not as many buyers as there were 3 or 4 years ago. I think that's true nationwide, but certainly in Florida. So I do think that will moderate, and I do think you'll see a correction.
We'll be right back. This is Squawk Pod.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Joe Kernen, along with Andrew Ross Sorkin. You can add Palantir now to the list of businesses and billionaires who are relocating to Florida. The AI titan joins a long list of others who started a footprint in the business-friendly state, including Ken Griffin, Citadel, Ken Griffin's Citadel, Amazon, Apple. Others join us now. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, look, we've got a lot going on in Florida, and you mentioned Ken Griffin, who had moved Citadel, a few years ago. Obviously, that has a big economic impact for a state. I mean, these are high-paying jobs. The footprint has really expanded. But one thing people don't talk about, and I can say certainly for Ken, he's donated in terms of philanthropic efforts, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars already in Florida. And obviously, he probably would have been doing that in Illinois had he not done that. So there's a big ripple effect that happens with all of this. Joe, I saw you in California, and I will tell you, this wealth tax is having a huge impact on people fleeing to Florida. 6 months ago, everyone was talking about Mindami causing New York to flee. I don't know that we've really seen that. But on this California thing, these are really, really big folks who are coming to Florida. We'll see whether they decide to move some business here. But I think they're in a situation where this has already either been taxed or it's an unrealized gain. It's a horrible tax policy to basically just seize some of the wealth. And then the founders of these companies, the way this provision is, they're imputed their voting rights as if they have equity. So for some of these big companies like Google, that's hundreds of billions of dollars that the founders don't actually own. And I think there's a sense of, hey, this is a ballot initiative. 50% plus one shouldn't be able to just vote and take away some of your property. Certainly our founding fathers didn't want to do that. So when I've talked to people, there's a sense of maybe it gets on the ballot, maybe it doesn't, maybe it passes, maybe it doesn't. But eventually something's going to get on the ballot and something's going to pass. And so I think people are taking action accordingly.
It's safe to say you're one of Mamdani's biggest fans, I guess.
Well, I think we're going to see. I don't think that story's been written yet, but I do think we're going to see an impact on that. I think it'll take a little longer. I think the California impact was very sudden at the end of last year because people saw the writing on the wall, and you saw a lot of big names noticeably, getting a foothold in Florida.
I mean, he's talking property taxes now. If he can't get some other tax increase from the governor, what are you doing with property taxes? You're going to phase them out completely?
Well, first of all, didn't he run on affordability? How is it more affordable to raise property taxes on working class people? I just don't understand that. So what we're working through, and we got to work with the Florida legislature, is phasing out the property tax for Florida residents and their primary, what we call a homesteaded property. And the way it works in Florida is that's about a third of all the property tax revenue because, these local governments are taxing investment properties, snowbirds, second, third homes, businesses, all those other things. And so the context of this is in 2019, local governments in Florida brought in $32 billion in property tax revenue. Now they're bringing in $60 billion. So if you go back to that 2019 level of spending, you give them population growth, you give them the inflation, even add a couple percent a year on top of that, you're not even close to 60 billion. So they're obviously getting a lot of this because property values have gone up. A lot of people moved to Florida, particularly during the COVID era, but people need relief. And what's happening, Joe, is you've got older people that have been in their home for a long time. They've had protection against valuation increases for 30 years. They're not downsizing because if they go from a 3 or 4 bedroom home to a condo, the tax basis is going to be so much higher that they can't afford it. So that hurts young people having access to be able to do it. So it needs to go on the ballot. It needs to get 60% of the vote, and we'll be working on that through the balance of the year.
Governor, you've had all the success getting all of these folks to come to Florida. That's the good news. The harder part seems to be the new challenge. You hear from folks who have moved who say it's hard to get into schools. There's all sorts of, housing. Obviously, the price of housing has gone up. That can be considered a good thing in certain cases. For others, what do you see now as the biggest challenge of this success, if you will?
Well, I think on some of the school stuff, I mean, that is a very, very elite problem, and since they want certain types of schools that maybe they had in New York City or whatever. We've got a lot of very good schools, charter schools, public schools, and even traditional private. I think they're looking at things that are a little different than what the typical family would do, and people are starting to build those, at that level to kind of attract the talent. And I think that'll all work itself out. On the housing, I'm a big believer in, we shouldn't be trying to juice the housing market. We shouldn't be doing it. These things go in cycles. And I think what happened was during COVID, there was a massive rush in Florida. You could sell a 3-bedroom house in Newport Beach, California for $2 or $3 million, and you could get 3 times the size of that in like a Sarasota. Well, that caused these values to go up. These things kind of go up and down. I think most people look at the housing market now, and there's just not as many buyers as there were 3 or 4 years ago. I think that's true nationwide, but certainly in Florida. So I do think that will moderate, and I do think you'll see a correction. But it needs to be done naturally, and it's not something that we can do from government.
We're going to talk AI. We'll talk about your Bill of Rights. My idea, just as an aside, and I was in Miami, went up to Jupiter and drove. I can't take the lights, Governor. I can't take the traffic lights. I can't take them. I can't take them anymore. I was like, there's 6 lanes everywhere all around, and first they got to turn left, then they got to turn left, then they got to turn left, then and sometimes it just seems like nothing is synchronized. Is AI a possibility, or do I just have to realize there's a lot of people that like to be in a state with no income? It's crowded. Is that it?
I think, I think there's a couple things. So, I did like $6 or $7 billion of accelerated infrastructure because we saw the people coming, and it's like some of these projects needed to be done. They weren't even scheduled to start till next decade. So we accelerated them. We're going to be able to deliver a lot 5, 10, even 15 years ahead of schedule. Now, Miami, Fort Lauderdale is tough because it's basically all built out. And so to be able, you really can't build a beltway. You really can't build. You can maybe do double decker. Some people are talking about doing tunnels and things like that, but those are not easy solutions. So if there is technology, that can help it, that obviously something that I would be involved, that I'd be interested in. In a lot of other parts of the state, once you get north of West Palm Beach, we've had success in being able to do things like on I-4 near Disney to be able to widen that, increase the flow. But some of this is just to keep our head above water because we've had so many visitors over the years. We just set another tourism record in 2025. And obviously the population has grown over the last few years.
I was leading into the idea of an AI Bill of Rights to protect the kids. We talked earlier about, kids are getting it from all sides at this point. And I don't know what we do, but this is probably one part of a solution.
Yeah, look, technology is great, but it needs to be harnessed in a way that is going to be beneficial for Americans. It's going to reinforce our values as Floridians and Americans. And that requires a framework. And so when I have a mom, like we have in Central Florida, whose son committed suicide, in part because of an AI chatbot and the relationship that was developed there and things the chatbot were telling the teen, who was a very vulnerable teen, that's a big, big problem. When I have moms who had teens where they would have sexually charged discussions with an AI chatbot, is that really the society that we want to have? And I think we look at the social media era, there were probably some things that could have been done to provide some guardrails that would have mitigated some of the damage we've seen on that. So our AI Bill of Rights is basically protecting young people, protecting parents, providing transparency. It's all very important, but there's not a single thing in that AI Bill of Rights that is going to stymie any type of legitimate innovation. I mean, if we're stymieing sexually suggested chatbots talking to 13-year-olds, well, that would be a good thing. We don't want that in our society. We also want to protect ratepayers against having costs of data centers given to them, which I think we've seen in other parts of the country, and we'll be the first state, I think, to lay down that marker to say, look, you got to pay your own way on this. We don't want to see our folks having to pay more for electricity.
Governor, we just had Chris Christie on the broadcast, and we were talking about prediction markets and states' rights in the context of gambling. And I wonder where you land on that.
Well, it's interesting. This is something like really within the last year has really become a big deal. So in Florida, we kind of have a unique relationship with the Seminole tribe of Florida. There was things done long before I was governor to give them exclusive rights over gaming. They also have the exclusive rights over sports betting. And so the question is something like Kalshi, is that clashing with the laws of the state of Florida, or is it separate? It's more of a prediction. So we're kind of trying to get our mind around that.
Thank you, Governor.
That's the podcast for today and for the week. Thank you for listening this entire week. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin, weekday mornings on CNBC starting at 6 a.m. Eastern. To get the best parts of that 3-hour TV show right into your ears, please follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. We'll meet you right back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.